Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see such a full room for this particular session, which is really going to talk about the next version of Jewish leadership. And we're going to hear from absolutely wonderful folks with whom I'll introduce in a moment. My name is Deborah Hausen-Curiel. I'm the director of the Wexner Israel Fellowship Program in Israel, which is one program of the Wexner Foundation that works also in the States in two separate programs that you may know about. If there's an opportunity to talk about them later on, I'd love to. So again, good afternoon. Despite your lingering thoughts about a wonderful lunch you've just had and the important connections that you've just made for your work back home, all of us on the podium are hoping that we're going to engage all of you in a discussion that will be interesting and relevant to your own work in the field of Jewish leadership development and Jewish peoplehood. So taking a look at our mandate for the next 90 minutes, could I have the slide, please, on that? Thank you. It's important to understand what several of the panelists, and some of you also, are about to get riled about, to wrestle with, and to ask hard questions about. So I'll quickly share two of my own comments on the framing of these questions. And first, let's take a common look and read together what the mandate is for all of us. Will the next Jewish leader please stand up? The Jewish people are facing new challenges. The fostering of young leadership is critical to overcoming these challenges and ensuring Jewish continuity. The essential function of communal, organizational, religious, and political leadership is to shape the future of the Jewish people. For this purpose, it is incumbent upon the current Jewish leadership to draw to its ranks the leading young people of the next generation. Is it possible to recruit, notice that word, to recruit, the outstanding youth of the Jewish people to leadership positions, or are the rising stars ducking the burden of being at the helm? What is the profile of a successful Jewish leader, and how can we identify and nurture the future leaders of the Jewish people? So two pieces of the challenge to which I take exception and offer as points of reflections just to start us off is first that the word Israel does not appear in the description of what we're supposed to be looking at. Why is that? What is the role of Israel and Israel's public leadership in the leadership of the Jewish people into the next generation and the generation after? The second issue that I noted as I was reading is about recruitment. What does it mean? What does recruiting peoplehood leadership entail? Is it even possible to recruit such a leadership? And some of us on the panel have been, the panel members have been discussing this also among ourselves, and I think some of them will have interesting comments for you. Fortunately, we have on today's panel, can everyone hear okay? Great. The best of the best to address these and other issues. So it's a privilege to introduce them. And we're going to go in their speaking order. Feel free, if you'd like, to add anything that you want about your own interests, things that you'd like to emphasize. But we'll start in the following order. So, Ms. Johanna Arviv Perugia was born and raised in Rome. After obtaining a degree in business administration from John Cabot University, she is focused on her professional career, on international business and finance. Johanna, in our context, is the chair of Keren HaYesod, UIA, the World Board of Trustees, and she's been a member of the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency since 2007. In November 2009, she co-chaired Keren HaYesod's International Leadership Conference in Rome, hosted by Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. Her oldest daughter will be having her bat mitzvah in Jerusalem next week. She's also a member of the steering committee of this conference, and as is Justin, and now's the time to say thank you to both of you and to the rest of the steering committee for putting on a conference at such a sophisticated level so consistently over the years. Carolyn Bogush is professionally a business psychologist, and she serves as the global chair of Limud. She's been in the leadership role for the last 2.5 years and has overall responsibility for everything that Limud does around the world. Currently, she's in Limud and Carolyn are in 60 communities around the world, where 40,000 people a year participate in Limud conferences. Carolyn also sits on the board of her synagogue and is involved with reviewing the role of women and leadership within the UK Jewish community. Justin Korda. Justin's also a member of the steering committee, as I've said. Thank you for your hard work on this conference and others. He's ROI Community's executive director. He's been with ROI, Global Net, for the half person in the room who doesn't know, a global network of Jewish innovators since its inception in 2005. He led the first Taglit Birthright Israel trip from Canada. He went on to become the coordinator of follow-up programs for returning participants from Taglit, and later served in a number of positions at the Canada-Israel Experience, where he was instrumental in implementing Taglit Birthright Israel for the first 5,000 participants from Canada. Professor Arna Pupko-Fisher is a nationally prominent scholar in the US. Arna is a professor at the Department of Judaic Studies at the University of Cincinnati. Thank you. They said they could hear, though. Okay. She's a scholar in residence for the Montreal Jewish Federation, a faculty member of the Wexner Heritage Foundation, a recipient of the Avichai Award for the most outstanding contribution for the enhancement of Jewish identity, and she's on the executive of the Federation of Cincinnati and the board of Hillel and Cincinnati 2020. Our wrap-up speaker is going to be Rabbi Daniel Smokler. He's the senior Jewish educator at the Bronfman Center for Jewish Student Life at NYU and has worked extensively as a community organizer and consultant in the labor movement in Connecticut and in LA. Rabbi Smokler was ordained in 2006 in Jerusalem, and since then he's worked for Hillel, where he founded the Senior Jewish Educators Initiative, which has been at the forefront of Hillel's educational initiatives over the past few years. He's currently pursuing a PhD. This is the star-studded group of experts that we have in front of us. I've asked them to be as disciplined as they can about speaking to us. Each one has 6 minutes to present a worldview and or responses to some of the questions that we have that have been posed to us by the conference's organizers. Let's have our first speaker, please.
I guess as I'm the only non-English native speaker, I've been asked to speak first because the others will get better. I have to say that looking around this room, one has to be very optimistic about the future of Jewish leadership. And I think everyone and each one of us should get up now because here are the future leaders. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very honored and humbled by the opportunity given me to speak about the future of Jewish leadership, which is something that I devote a lot of time and energy to. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. Honestly, I can think of no other area where it is truer than our topic at hand today, because it all started as a necessity. Having spent generations in slavery, the Hebrew people came up with a profoundly sustainable solution. Correctly, Jewish leadership. I don't know if a business plan was ever formally submitted for launching the very successful Jewish people product, but ever since Moshe Rabbeinu led the Jewish people out of Egypt to the first glimpse of Eretz Israel, we have been firmly invested in the business of leadership, with incredible profit margins to show for it. So we have a great product, but there doesn't seem to be many new takers interested in taking it on. Sales are apparently sinking to an all-time low. So what now? Well, here's a great suggestion. Let's do something. Doing something does not mean shaking our heads in despair and bemoaning the lack of Jewish values among the younger generation. Doing something means checking the suitability of the product to the clientele, that is to say, reevaluating Jewish leadership, while evaluating the young Jews who seem inexplicably to be uninterested. Before we stamp a Jewish leadership failed on their foreheads, let's first ask if young Jews have been given any relevant tools with which to connect to Jewish leadership. And just before we do this, it might be worthwhile checking to see if there's any young Jewish leadership going on under right our noses that we have somehow missed. Jewish leadership and Jewish identity is no longer always about being affiliated to Jewish communities or Jewish Israel-related organization. So, what is it about? And how do we lead in such an undefined milieu? We lead by meeting the younger generation on their turf, by accepting that the younger generation, of which I guess I'm part of, thinks and feels and touches the world on multiple levels. I believe that in today's world, everyone is able, in some capacity, to be a leader. In our parents' generation, there were those who did and those who didn't. Such categorization have thankfully lost meaning today. If a young Jewish entrepreneur today decides that among his or her many other interests and pursuits, he or she has a passing interest in Israel and decides to invest in that, even in a small way, either in terms of time or money, that is Jewish identity. That is commitment. If that person then tweets on how this made him feel to a following of 2,000 or perhaps 9,000, that makes him a Jewish leader. And that is what we need to recognize. A recommendation through social media is often more effective than marketing because it constitutes a personal connection and trust. We know it leads to action, and many are the examples in front of us. Karen Isod, in partnership with the Jewish Agency and the government of Israel, is nurturing new Jewish leaders through support of Taglit and Masa. And believe me, there's not a Facebook wall in the world that can compete with a trip to Israel surrounded by young people. Over the next decade, Taglit is expected to enable 50% of young Jewish adults to visit Israel. Well, that is leadership. Child experts tell us that parents' main task is not to be an instructor, but to be a lighthouse, a point of reference, a light by which the next generation can comprehend their environment and steer a sure course. That tallies with the Jewish tradition of Or Legoim, being a light unto the nations. My personal lighthouse and point of reference was and remains Karen Isod UIA, a fixture that shines bright, bringing perspective and value to everything it touches. I chose to take a leadership role in Karen Isod because of my deep and certain understanding of the centrality of Israel to the Jewish people, of the centrifugal force Israel provides to the Jewish people. The recreation and existence of the State of Israel has changed not only how the world sees the Jews, but how the Jews feel and see themselves. But let us remember that nevertheless, it is far too easy to lose sight of what we have accomplished. 60 years ago, no sane, level-headed person or leader, for that sake, could have imagined that we would have had what we have. A language brought back to life, and bookstores filled with hundreds of linear feet of books in a language that just a century ago almost no one spoke. More people studying Torah now than there's ever been in Europe at its height. An economic engine that is the envy of many supposedly more established countries. A democracy fashioned by immigrants, most of whom have never lived in a functioning democracy. Cutting-edge healthcare, an army that keeps us safe. We go days on end without even thinking about our enemies. That's worth remembering in the midst of the attacks on us from the international community as well as from Jews. There's much to repair, and too often we fail to meet the standards we've set for ourselves. All true, and they demand our continued attention, but at the same time, we dare not lose sight of what we've built. To borrow the phrase from Virginia Slims, we've come a long way, baby. The Jews have a future because the Jews have a state, and Jewish leadership has a future because we have to protect and fortify that state. For me, that centrality translates into collective effort, because only through acting collectively can we make the kind of impact that will advance Israel and the Jewish people. I'm talking about the kind of impact that can bring 3 million Jews to Israel and develop Israel's borders towns, weaker communities, and youth at risk. The kind of impact that can advance Israel's society and by association, the entire Jewish people. But the Jewish people has to be about the future, because the ruins and tragedies of the past, while forming an essential part of our collective identities, do not fire sustainable Jewish life for the future. We cannot build our future on the suffering of Bnei Israel in Egypt and in every generation since. Each Jewish leader since Moses has led forward to something completely new and previously unfathomable. And this is my goal as Keren Yesod UAA, as an agent of the Jewish people. This means that rendering and developing the connection point between Israel and world Jewry and exploring how to make this work to the advantage of the entire Jewish people of Am Israel. For me, one of the most important elements of Jewish leadership is playing a leading role in attracting and engaging young Jews from all over the globe. I recently returned from the first Keren Yesod UAA organized forum, which brought together highly successful young Jews from all over the world for an outstandingly successful 3-day conference in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. The young professional participants brought with them everything they are, their careers, their interests, outlooks and personality, their level of energy and motivation was truly inspiring. This is truly what I mean by meeting the young generation in their turf. The product is unique, my dear friends. The way we package it must be innovative. To be a leader, as Sheldon Adelson told us a few weeks ago in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, you need to have a vision and a passion. I am convinced that the passion that has guided the Jewish people for 5,000 years will continue to do so, and the vision, the focus on tomorrow that Shimon Peres has led into this wonderful conference of leaders and thinkers is only one of the examples why we should be optimistic about the Jewish future, but at the same time being aware of our responsibilities and playing an active role, because all of us, each and every one of us, can contribute in making a difference. Toda rabah.
Thank you so much. I neglected to ask you, members of the audience, as you're listening to the members of the council, I almost said, as the panel, please feel absolutely free to write your questions, comments, insights on papers which are either supplied on the sides or that you can take out of your notebooks and pass along. And pass them over to the side, and they'll be collected and brought down here, and we'll use them for the next session of our questions and answers. Okay, our next speaker is Carolyn, please.
Okay, good afternoon. Again, like everyone else, I'm really pleased to be here, very humbled to be on this particular panel. So I guess there's two things that I bring to the table. One is in my professional life, I work as a psychologist in business. I work in the field of leadership and management, but I don't think that's why I was invited to speak on the panel. It's because, as you've heard, I'm the chair of Limmud. For those of you that don't know anything about Limmud, my first question is, where have you been? And just to give you a little bit, and I'm just going to describe a bit about our values, because that's what brings me to my comments this afternoon. Our values and our principles are what brings me to my view on young leadership today. So Limmud, for those of you that don't know, is one of the most exciting, innovative, creative, dynamic organizations across the Jewish world. Our mission is to take everybody one step further on their Jewish journey. And we do this through volunteer-led conferences, residential and non-residential, that are totally conceived, designed, run, managed by volunteers. And I really mean that. People who have jobs, who study, and usually have lots of other volunteer activities as well. And our humble beginnings began 32 years ago in England, and we're now, as you heard, in 60 communities around the world. Just last week, in case you didn't know, you missed events in Moldova, China, Baltimore, and Sydney. So we're very proud of the difference that we have made. So as I say, we are a volunteer-led organization, and we have some very core principles and values that I think is what enables our volunteers and our leaders to take the roles that they do. So just a couple of those that I think are important for you to understand my context and where I come from. So one is about empowerment. We truly, and I quote, inspire people to be ambitious about their contribution. We allow our volunteers and our leaders to take roles. If they say, I want to get involved, we say, that's great. Why don't you chair this conference? Why don't you run this event? And that's really important to me, and when I talk more about where I think our young leaders are today. The second one is that we encourage diversity. If you come to any of our events, we are one of the only organizations in the Jewish world that attracts people from every aspect of that Jewish world, from the very secular to the unaffiliated or uninspired, depending on which sessions you went to yesterday, all the way through to the more orthodox or people that are already affiliated with different organizations. And we attract people of every single generation. So it's very common when you come to our events to find 3 and sometimes 4 generations of a family learning together. That means that our leaders in our organization are from an incredibly diverse and broad range of backgrounds. And the third value that is relevant for this discussion is that we truly have respect for each other, and our arguments are there for the sake of heaven. We believe that having differences between people help us, they educate us, they enhance our own development. So we encourage difference as long as we're all there for the same reason. And again, that reflects in our pool of leaders and volunteers in our organization. So what does that mean for us as an organization? It means we create events for ourselves, by ourselves, and we inspire people. We inspire people to go further on their Jewish journey, either within our own community or elsewhere. And we're very proud of some of the other organizations and events that have spun off from conversations, usually very late at night in our bars. So there are 2 questions that we were posed. One was about where are our rising stars? Are they here or are they ducking their responsibility? I'm feeling very optimistic about where our rising stars are. I think they're absolutely right in front of us. I think we certainly have people within our organization who are taking on very significant leadership roles now, or I can identify those that will be there in a couple of years' time. Just to give you an example, the main conference that we have in Limud is still the one in the UK. It's in December. We have about 2,500 people. We have about 450 presenters, 1,200 sessions. You're all very welcome. And the small group, 20 volunteers that put that together, on average, are all under the age of 30. That's where our leaders are. They are there. They are doing. They are acting now as leaders and making a massive difference to our community. I also recently, last week, was sitting with the chief rabbi of the UK and also Professor Ron Heifetz from Harvard, and we were celebrating 20 years of a leadership program in the UK. And again, there in front of us were 250 young people who already are engaging in a huge range of organizations, making a difference in every aspect of Jewish life, both in the UK and more broadly. So I reflected on this and thought, okay, so we have our leaders, they're there, they're stepping up, but we still have challenges. And I believe that the challenges that we're facing are within our communities and within our infrastructure and the structure that is there, not because of the individuals themselves. So just a couple of thoughts to share with you. One is we need to create a space for our young leaders. If we want people to step up and take on these leadership roles, some other people need to step aside. We need to make space for these people to come through and show us what they're made of and what they can do. Thank you very much. Secondly, I think we need to give people a chance. I think in Limud, compared to other organizations that I see, if somebody says they want to get involved, say they have a passion for something, we pretty much let them get on with it. We don't have a big hierarchy. We don't have lots of levels that you have to get through. And I think it's right in our community that we take a little bit of a chance and a risk on some people, because in my experience, it always pays off. We need to also remove some barriers that are in our community, and it's sort of what I touched on already about some of the diversity that we see in Limud and we don't see elsewhere, okay? You look around most of the global community, Jewish community, and I am generalizing, most of the leaders in senior positions are generally men. I'm delighted that this panel is slightly swayed in the opposite direction. They're mostly men, they're mostly older, and a big problem is that many of them are wealthy. I mean, that's a good thing. But they're in the leadership positions because of what they bring to the table in that context, not because necessarily of the skills and the impact and the difference that they can make to their organization. And Limud bucks that trend. Okay, that's not what we see at all in terms of the leaders that we have across the world. And the final thing on this point about where are our leaders, I think also we have to think a little bit about managing the expectations as well of people that want to become leaders. I think we need to move away from this idea that it's about job title and status and role. And I would foresee much more that we talk about acts of leadership, that we allow people an opportunity to step up and take acts of leadership, even if they're not named as a leader in an organization. There are lots and lots of opportunities. It's something that Ron Heifetz talked about in terms of leading without authority. There are lots of opportunities where people can step up, take charge, take the lead without necessarily being the most senior person. Am I allowed to keep going? Okay, I'll talk very quickly. The second thing was about whether or not there is a profile of what is a really effective Jewish leader. And actually, I don't believe there is. I think that would be a shame if we said that you have to fit this kind of box. I can tell you what I think it isn't. I don't think being a Jewish leader is about going on a power trip. I don't think it's about ego. I don't think it's about telling people what to do. I think there are some core things that are really important to what makes a really effective Jewish leader. One is that idea of just stepping up and taking responsibility, seeing that something needs doing and stepping up and doing it. I think it's about believing in the people that you lead. It's really about building relationships so you truly believe that you're all on the same page and that you're driving towards a clear vision. Something that the chief rabbi said, he recently talked about 7 principles of effective leadership. One of the things he said is that being a leader is stressful and emotionally demanding. I absolutely concur with that. I think it's a really tough job. I think to be a leader, you have to be resilient, you have to be thick-skinned. But you know what? We do it anyway because it's something that we truly believe in. So to finish off, I think our leaders are there. I absolutely think we need to create the space for them. I think there are 2 other core things. I think you have to step up and want to do it, and I think you have to find a passion. I think you have to find the thing that really speaks to you, and if we help our leaders do that, then I think the future looks very optimistic. Thank you.
Justin Corder, please.
Anybody else find it interesting that the future leadership session is right after Dr. Ruth's masterclass? Delayed reaction there, huh? Okay, it's not stand-up time, I know. Friends, so I concur with a lot of things that Caroline just said about being optimistic. I wanted to get up here and be very contrarian, but it's going to be tough. The question here, I agree. I think that there's a flaw in the question that we're addressing here about whether young Jews are, ducking the burden of being at the helm. In the work that I do, I have the privilege of working with a few different kinds of Jewish leaders. At ROI Community, the majority of our members are what I call, not usually in public forums like this, but Jewish leaders who are leading organizations or initiatives that are aimed at building Jewish community or Jewish life. And I also have the great privilege of working with young Jews who are working on initiatives, national initiatives or global initiatives aimed at bettering the world. And very often, those initiatives or their pursuit of those initiatives are motivated by Jewish values. For example, we bring a trip to Israel every summer from an organization from the United States called Teach for America, where there are a disproportionate number of young Jews who are part of this organization trying to create educational equity across the United States. And so many of these young people come to Israel. They're involved in this organization because they're motivated by Jewish values. And they come to Israel and they discover that actually, even if they weren't motivated by Jewish values, they are in fact living very Jewish lives because their values and the things that they're working towards are inherently Jewish values. So So I have a question, and I see by the people in the room that there are so many folks who are involved in Jewish leadership development programs. I see Mandel Fellows, Bronfman Youth Fellowships folks, Wexner people, present tense people, folks from the Foreign Ministry Fellowships, all the limuds across the world. There's a lot of these leadership development opportunities. If you've been involved in one of these leadership development opportunities in the last 2 or 3 years, clap your hands. Okay. I was hoping for a little louder, but that's okay. It's still early. Look, I'll ask a rhetorical question to the folks who are within those organizations who are organizing these leadership programs. Is anybody having a challenge recruiting people into these programs? I don't think so. I know for my organization, we get about 4 or 5 applicants for every spot that we have available at our ROI summits every summer. And you know, to be totally honest with a confession here, the day that we send out our acceptance letters, which is inevitably always the same day where we send out more non-acceptance letters than acceptance letters, is the day where you can usually find me like curled up in a ball in some corner freaking out about the damage that we're causing to people who aren't getting accepted to these programs rather than the ones who we are taking to the programs. There are amazing people out there, and as far as I can see, they are standing up, they're waving their flags, they want to be noticed, and they're doing amazing things. The question is not whether are they standing up. The question is, what are we as a community, as a global Jewish community, what are we doing to support these people? What are we doing to deploy them? What are we doing to network them together? And to answer that question, I'll just share one thought with you. And I think that, you know, my one thought about what I think we could be doing better in the Jewish world to support these young people and deploy them and network them is embracing the idea of taking risks. And I had a very brief stint in the financial world for a pretty short amount of time before I realized that I was really a career Jew at heart. And I realize that we often hear the word risk in a very negative connotation. But in the financial world, risk, there's this notion of risk and reward. And smart investors realize that, you know, risk, there's a utility in risk. The greater the risk, the greater the reward. And there are financial equations that can be used in order to discern what kinds of reward you can expect for the kinds of risk that you're taking. And I would suggest that we as a Jewish community be much more open to taking risk and really embrace risk. And a couple of the kinds of risks that I'm talking about are, well, one, risking our comfort zones. When people gather together at conferences like this one, there's an amazing thing that happens when you gather people from different disciplines. Steve Johnson talks about this idea of what breeds innovation. And one of the main drivers of innovation is when you are exposed to people from different disciplines, for people who are unlike you, and being exposed to that kind of thought, and creating these safe spaces where cross-pollination of ideas can happen, and people from certain disciplines can be exposed to other ideas. So I would say that, number one, having more opportunities to gather, like here in this room, like other conferences that go on, and even online as technology gets better, that will be made more easily accessible. Number two, I would submit to you that young people today know very well what they need in order to become more professional and to be able to better execute their visions. And I would submit that we should do a better job of listening to them and offering them the tools that they say that they need, as opposed to the things that we, the community, think that they need. Whether that means, for some people, deeper, more immersive Jewish experiences to deepen their Jewish knowledge, whether for some people that means offering them more management training or specific skills training in order for them to professionalize and be able to implement their visions in a better way. And lastly, I would say that we need to be better at risking failure. Nobody wants to fail. But I think that in the Jewish world, we've been very quick to label anything that ceases to exist as a failure. And in many ways, the risk takers that are behind some initiatives or social entrepreneurs that take certain risks in order to try out a new idea are really our frontline action researchers on how to do things right. And when we dismiss certain things as failures, or we actually don't take notice of sometimes the unintended consequences that come out of some of these initiatives, we're really throwing away a huge investment. I think probably most people in this room, and I see a few people, I do see a few people who are involved in business, would probably tell you that an entrepreneur that has a few failures under his belt, that's actually a good thing. To be able to come back to the table and say, well, yeah, I failed a couple of times, but I learned the lessons from those failures. That person is probably in a much better situation now to execute and be successful than they were as a first-time entrepreneur. And I would say that the same thing is true with young Jewish leaders today. That we need to be a lot more open to extracting the positive outcomes of so-called failures. So that's my piece. I think that was 5 or 6 minutes. So I will, I'll stop now. Thank you.
So as Arna's coming up to speak, 2 things. First of all, we'd love to have your questions that are already ready. If the folks responsible for collecting them can bring them down and get them to me, we'll take a look and use them as soon as we can. And Jordan, thank you. Justin, you've set us up for the key stat about this panel. We were looking for the right place to put it in terms of the Jewish continuity street cred that we have. Among us, we've worked out that we have 16 kids, everybody on the panel. This is in continuation of what you said about where our next Jewish leadership is coming from. And as everybody sitting down, 4 sets of twins. I think that's amazing. Arna.
Thank you. They want to know about the twins. You never do that in teaching. They're all distracted. I'll never get them back again. I, too, was so honored to be invited and so happy to be here. I always tell my husband I feel like I'm at my best in Jerusalem. I'm sure so many of us feel that way. Also honored about the complexion of this panel in particular, and I just have to share some personal nachas of seeing Justin. Justin, I knew you when you were this high, and really, really wonderful. You know.
Okay, Montreal, settle down.
We're all very local here. One of the challenges that we have as panelists and that we discussed in our conference call beforehand is, everyone wants to be the provocative panel that everyone leaves talking about, and our struggle was we're pretty much going to be on the same page. I think, I haven't heard the rabbi yet, but this is actually very good news. No, not that I haven't heard the rabbi yet, but it's good news that there's tremendous consensus that there's something really wonderful and unique and extraordinary, what I would give to be 25 in the Jewish world today. This is not the Jewish world in which I grew up, and there's probably no more interesting segment of the Jewish world that is more interesting and breaking molds and doing the unimaginable than this demographic of young Jews and young leaders. I've been teaching and observing this cohort since about the age of 19. I'm now 54. You can do the math. Not my strong suit. I'm a Jewish educator and medieval philosopher, so we never had to add. And actually, I've always taught either college age or adults. And in one of my favorite teaching moments at the University of Cincinnati, I was sharing with my students that at one point I had to teach for about 3 months preschoolers, and I was terrible at it. Terrible. I used to watch the clock, so did they. They couldn't even tell time. And I was sharing with my students how bad I was at it, and one of my students said, perhaps, Professor Fisher, it's because preschoolers don't take well to sarcasm. I'm like, maybe that was it. So my remarks are going to be anecdotal and through observation. First, let me answer the questions. Recruitment from the outside, is it good? Yes, of course it's good. Outside, anything outside is good, right? Ivri, Judaism, Abraham, all of the great leaders of our biblical narratives were all in one respect or another outsiders. All of the interesting moments in Jewish history happen in some respect, either philosophically or somehow physically from the outside. Outside is always good. As Jews, we want outside. That's what keeps us honest. That keeps us interesting. The prophets were the ultimate outsiders. No one wanted to hear what they had to say. Actually, when I landed here, I went through passport control. I haven't had a chance to have, this is my biggest audience so far. I haven't had a chance to tell anyone this yet. I went through passport control, and the officer looks up. I don't know how he figured this out, but without asking me a single question, he said, "Are you coming to the conference?" I said, "Yes, actually I am. Are you seeing a lot of people coming?" He said, "Yeah, I don't understand. So many people ganging up on one man?" I said, "You mean the president?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "No, we're not ganging up." And I tried to explain it, and he said, "Does he get to respond?" So I tried to explain, no, it's an honor for us to be here. And so one guy in the country no one's mad at, and he just said, "Next." But anyway. So in the answer to recruitment, yes, outside is good. What's the successful profile of a young Jewish leader? Well, I can tell you what isn't the successful profile, and something that we've sort of been relying on, particularly in the organized federation community, which is if you're 45 and you have a heartbeat and you walk into an organized Jewish institution, you're a leader. And yes, it's funny, but I mean that quite honestly. You know, as much as you're going to hear a lot of grassroots talk in terms of what makes something interesting and real, I'm just going to, throw a dose of cold water and also remind us that we've sort of cheapened, in some respects, the notion of leadership and what it really means. And so really all I'm interested in terms of the successful profile is someone who has talent, and talent that can be nurtured and has the inclination and predilection to involve oneself in the Jewish community. And so those are the answers to the questions, but let me just share with you again through my anecdotal experience as a longtime Jewish teacher, the two things that I want us to think about. The first I would just describe as let them be, which is really sort of the philosophical underpinning of what you just heard Justin describe. What Justin just described, and Carolyn and Johanna in many respects, is sort of the outcome, the practicality of what it means to let a generation be. I'm going to anger a few Montrealers, I think, or disappoint them when I share the following. We did a tremendous thing in Montreal a number of years ago when we were worried about who was leaving, and we created this tremendous initiative called Pro Montreal, and it was successful. And a piece of it was developing what we called Student Federation. One of the success stories is sitting right here. But let me share with you my observations. For some, we brought in perfectly interesting, not that well-dressed, mostly McGill students, and we made them, our expression was, they became federated. And it was almost like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where these really interesting, cool students who were upset with the Federation for a whole bunch of reasons now became one of us. And I'm not going to say that they started walking around with Chanel bags, which would be Mark by Marc Jacobs would be the closest thing. But there was this kind of intoxication with being involved at a power structure that was not only inappropriate to them, but took away the best piece of them, which was that outsiderness. And so sometimes in our desperation to get young people involved, particularly in our mainstream institutions, we get them involved in such a way that takes away the best thing about them or doesn't allow them to express it in their fullest. In another kind of way, I want to make an observation about birthright. And this all goes back to the notion of genuineness. Because I think everyone in the panel would agree with me that what students have and what young leaders have, that some of us lose through time and disappointment and experience, is a genuineness and a sense of authenticity. And I always feel that, ironically, birthright is at its best when, as much as follow-up is critical, and as much as follow-up is part of the equation, I always want the young people who we take to know that that's not why we bring you to Israel. We bring you to Israel because we love Israel. We bring you to Israel because we want you to love Israel. And it's not always the so that when you come back, you will marry a Jew, so that when you come back, you'll get involved with your Hillel, so that when you come back, you'll give tzedakah. We bring you here because it's right. And part of that genuineness, the capacity to be honest, will allow us to be successful in these unbelievably wonderful and original initiatives. And so what we're seeing now is a new world, Justin mentioned some of them, of social entrepreneurship, present tense, reboot, slingshot, jumpstart, the whole Jewish Funders Network, all as a response to what can we do differently and how can we shake it up. So let them be as they are. And our job is to let us be who we are. And what I mean by that is sort of the opposite of, there's the Saturday Night Live old skit of the stewardess who goes up, the flight attendant, and says, "Sir, I'm just going to have to ask you to calm down." So the good news that you're hearing here is us saying to the Jewish community, calm down. It's going to be okay. And not only is it going to be okay because these interesting things are happening, because we're letting students and young leaders be themselves, but it's going to be okay because we need to have an existential confidence in what it is that we are. And what it is that we are a terribly interesting people. A people, as you've heard, with this rich system of values that becomes even more interesting with time. And I will tell you, and I'm sure the rabbi will, I hope, back me up in one way or another, I have never seen text study fail. I have never seen an encounter with serious Jewish ideas fail. It's always better and more interesting because of it. President Perez spoke this morning about trust. And we need to trust the product that we have, and we need to mine it, and we need to exploit it, and we need to believe it as a Jewish community. If we do what we do best, if we are in our best possible sense of ourselves, which is Jews with this miraculous, complicated wrestling tradition, allow it to be exposed. Trust that that's what we have to offer. Trust that young Jewish leaders want to be, messed up a little bit. They want to feel challenged. They want to feel that what we have to offer is complicated. Otherwise, it's not interesting. And I would say, lastly, if there is one trait that I hope that we are both producing and exposing and seeing in young Jewish leaders, is this notion of combination of being interesting and being vulnerable. That I think the reason young leadership is so interesting is because it brings to us is vulnerability. And my disappointment in bringing student leaders into this very kind of artificial or contrived or predictable adult structure is that we remove that idea of the vulnerability, of the hunger and the interest. And as Woody Allen says about love, unless it keeps on moving forward, it sinks. I would say about Jewish leadership, it needs to keep on moving forward. It needs to stay interesting. It needs to stay authentic, and therefore it will explode. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Rabbi Smokler.
Good afternoon. In case you're wondering about the twins, all 4 sets are actually mine. I have 8 children under the age of 4. It's quite a burden. I'm kidding. You'll believe nothing I say now. I don't want to be contrarian, but I do, and I don't want to be the pessimist, but I'm forced to be honest in my assessment, and rather than cheerlead. I happen to believe that it's clear with anyone who has eyes to see that the best and brightest, or the rising stars, as we've described them, are in fact not taking up positions of Jewish communal leadership. That is in no way to knock any of the people in the room. I happen to imagine that I'm involved in it too, and I did some of those fellowships, but you look at the talent pool that's in any business school, any law school, any medical school that's working in tech, in government, in finance, people who are in cutting-edge NGOs, and we pale in comparison. We simply pale in comparison. I routinely witness the best and the brightest not taking up these positions and instead expressing their leadership in other arenas. And I want to offer an analysis why. If leadership is about, on some level, taking responsibility for a community, then you have to have a stake in a community, right? You have to have a collective identity. And it is precisely this kind of identity that many young Jews, particularly those in the United States, lack today. I want to offer you some language and an image to describe this situation, and then 3 potential metaphors for how we might address it in the realm of Jewish education. So first, some language. My colleague, Steve Cohn, he distinguishes between 2 approaches to Jewish life that I think are enormously helpful to name. The first is a normative approach, and the second, an aesthetic approach. The normative approach, it's about norms, rules. These are rules or norms that could derive from God or from nostalgia, from parents, from tradition, from politics, anything larger than yourself and your immediate family. This approach is collective in its orientation. It sees Jewish life as primarily social, manifest in the way one acts in accordance with a group. It argues that Jewish involvement is good and right, and that certain ways of being Jewish are better than others. In contrast to that normative approach stands the aesthetic approach. The aesthetic approach is meaning-based. It sees Judaism primarily as a resource for meaning, for beauty, for culture, rather than an ethical or moral imperative. The aesthetic approach is personal, interior, it's voluntarist, it's journey-oriented. It sees the individual and her unique Jewish journey as the primary unit of meaning. Normative, aesthetic. I want to be clear that the aesthetic approach offers a much-needed level of personalization, of meaning and purpose to the normative approach. Right? Don't think for a minute it's either or. It has been times a very useful corrective, but we've reached an extreme where the normative approach, the notion that Jewish life is a collective one with certain norms and imperatives, has become the almost exclusive purview of the Orthodox community. That's where we're at right now. In the eyes of other Jews, the normative approach often seems quaint at best, if not heavy-handed and downright authoritarian. Those of you in the room with the normative identity, you are the minority. You are the minority. Without the normative approach, the very idea of community is strained. A group of people together who share an aesthetic Judaism, in my opinion, do not create a community. They create what Robert Bellah calls a lifestyle enclave. A lifestyle enclave. That's a group of individuals with similar consumer patterns. Community is a term that I think we often denigrate or cheapen. Community is a term that I reserve for a multi-generational group of people that share a common narrative transcending the individual, that have shared images of what a good life looks like. Any group of people that are just associating, or associating well, or even consuming noble Jewish things together, that's not a community in and of itself. It's a lifestyle enclave. Judaism has historically been a collective, normative community of memory. To see Judaism as an experience that has to be justified in terms of meaning is like asking if it would be meaningful to love our parents, if it would be fulfilling to be there for our siblings, if it would be edifying to care for our children. Those are questions I wouldn't ask. Judaism has traditionally been a kind of historical familialism, what David Hartman awkwardly calls a mishpachtology. But today, most Jews in the United States where I come from, and increasingly in other Western democracies, see it as an aesthetic, individual experience. And this leads me to an image I want you to consider. That's of an adopted child meeting her birth parents. When I work with young Jews on college campuses, at UCLA, at Occidental, at NYU, any of the places where I've worked, that is the image I see when young Jews explore Judaism for the first time. It's an adopted child meeting her birth parents. It could potentially be a life-altering encounter that shakes the very origins of one's sense of being, or it could just be a really awkward cup of coffee. Our young potential leaders see Judaism in aesthetic terms, but if we're honest, I think we would actually like them to see it in normative terms. And how do we do that? I just want to offer you 3 brief images in Jewish education, my field, of what that might look like. Cohn argues that we need to develop a way of speaking and modeling and teaching that combines aesthetic and normative. You got to do both together at the same time. So what would that look like? What would it look like to do aesthetic and normative education at the same time? I want to give you 3 images from the philosopher Michael Oakeshott about what that might look like. The first is to describe or to experience learning as an ongoing conversation. Jewish education as a conversation unfolding in texts and behaviors. A conversation is open and inviting. It's dialogical. It respects both parties. It doesn't have to devolve into talking points or aspire to policy initiatives. The aim of a conversation is a conversation. That's it. Conversation never stops. The only end to a conversation is you pause until you see that person again. A conversation is good in and of its own right. To learn Jewishly is to listen to an ongoing conversation of how Jews have lived and what they've lived for, and to seek to be worthy of contributing to that conversation. Second, Oakeshott suggests that we see learning, or Jewish education, as an adventure in self-understanding. We learn to know ourselves by seeing how others before us have lived, and we ask why other people lived for what they lived for. But knowing ourselves is not simply a Jewish journey. Journey, in my opinion, is far too therapeutic a term to be applied to everyone. It's an adventure. Adventure is perilous, risky, volatile, full of struggle. It's surprising, it's exhilarating. You can fail at an adventure. You can fall off the map. To learn Jewishly is not to gain a degree of information, but to seek to know oneself. And as a Jew, that's our Jewish collective self as well, in the broadest, fullest sense. And finally, Oakeshott suggests we see learning, in his term, as the gift of an interval. And by this he means learning is a gift, it's a privilege, but it's also removed from the comings and goings of daily life. The gift of an interval means that you take even an interval of 30 minutes in a week, even that small amount of time out to learn simply for its own sake, with no application, with no referent point outside. We learn Torah Lishma. So just to summarize, I think we face a challenge that young potential leaders do not have a collective communal Jewish identity. I think that's the reality for the vast majority of young Jews in the United States. They have an aesthetic identity. And the education of leaders of tomorrow must be both evocatively aesthetic, but ultimately lead to some kind of normative identity. And I've given you 3 images that Oakeshott suggests for that process. If we create spaces where young people can experience that gift of an interval, to learn simply to learn, if they can see this as a process that is a great adventure in self-understanding, and that it can transpire as a conversation where they're listening to all that has been said before them, and they imagine that they might be worthy to contribute, then we can imagine young, non-Orthodox Jews who currently see their Judaism aesthetically rooting themselves in a deeper normative tradition, and ultimately imagining that they too could take responsibility for the Jewish community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. It's now time for you, the audience, to start asking the hard questions. So we're going to take questions from you both written down and from the floor. You just said, Rabbi, that the aim of a conversation, thank you, the aim of a conversation is a conversation. Let the conversation begin. Let's have some questions from the floor, and you are all each invited to respond. Again, keep your responses as short as you can because we want to get a lot of audience response for this. First question, please. Hold on, can everybody hear? We might need a microphone here. Okay, hold on, we'll get you a microphone.
I'm Saul from...
Who's the next person with a question? We'll get you a microphone. Okay, we're up there at the top.
Me. Hi, I'm Saul from Johannesburg in South Africa. I have 2 questions. The first one I'd like to direct at the rabbi. Carolyn mentioned that many people in Limud have many other volunteer positions, and this forum was tasked at discussing the burden of being at the helm of Jewish leadership. My question is not, how do we deal with people at the helm? Because I think we're preaching to the choir here. To be a good leader, you need to gather support. And how do we encourage leadership from people that don't naturally come forward and volunteer themselves? And how do we do this in a natural, genuine way without trips overseas, trips to Israel, parties, alcohol, like a genuine interest in leadership? The reason I directed it at you, I apologize, is because you used the analogy of leadership as a discussion.
Yeah,
to rephrase the question, how do you get people involved in the discussion?
I mean, there's a practical, organizing question of how you go meet and talk to new people, and there's no secret about that. That's true of any NGO, any labor, anybody who's gone door to door and met people and social networked. That's a policy issue. I think there's a much more primary thing, which is if people aren't interested in Judaism and in Jewish collectivity, there's no way they're ever going to take up the helm of an organization. So the real question is, how do you get people interested in Jewish collective identity?
I'm not talking about the helm of an organization. I'm talking about leadership encouraging people to just get onto the ship.
Yeah, I mean, if I knew how to reach out to the other 90%, I'd have the answer. My other panelists probably know much better than I have no idea.
Anybody else want to take a shot?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think the thing is to get people interested in the first place. And I think what Limud tries to do, obviously I'm very pro-Limud, is to provide a massive range of stuff. So it's not that we have an agenda, we don't have a particular focus, we keep it very open, and the people that put together our program are the people that put together stuff they're interested in. And once they're there, yeah, of course we use alcohol and we use the bar to persuade people to do things, but actually we give people lots of chances to do small things. So it's not just taking on that big role, but they build up slowly.
Limud, for an example, is a bigger, broader organization, but the committees that I serve on, both secular, religious, Jewish and not, are more focused, so it's a lot harder to target audiences for specific areas of interest.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's about getting them through the door, but then even in that, I volunteer in my synagogue, which is very targeted. I think then it's about giving people small things to do that make a difference. So it's not waiting for them to step up. It's like you say, you have to go out, you have to talk to people, you have to engage them in the stuff they find interesting within the constraints of what you're doing.
Okay. And my second question is...
Excuse me?
Sorry.
We're going to need to limit your question. You have a turn again at the end. Anybody else want to respond to his first question? If not, let's take the question from way in the back up there, the microphone up there. And microphone folks, if you can sort of anticipate by looking at the hands, that would be really helpful. Until the microphone gets to you, I'm just going to intervene with a question about a question. Somebody wrote, what should be Israel's share in developing young leadership? And then you don't have to ask the question if you think it's not relevant. So the answer is that it's relevant. Anybody wants to address that during your answers to other questions, great. You're welcome to ask yours.
Oops. Hello, my name is Daniel, and just to say thank you so much, really inspiring and really exciting to have you here, so thank you. I just want to say that I actually agree with Daniel that sometimes the top people go to other careers, and obviously you've all mentioned that there's a huge gap for young Jewish leadership. My question is Jewish leadership a sustainable career option full-time? Because many of you have great jobs that I also really, really admire. And even Caroline, you just said, in my professional life I work as, is Jewish leadership an option professionally?
Thank you.
Well, I can give you my personal example. I'm not a career Jewish leader. I have my own career. I'm senior advisor of a real estate private equity fund, but I have a family, 3 kids. But yet Jewish leadership is one of the things that I do with the most passion, and I think you can do it. In days, 24 hours. With 24 hours, you can do a lot of things. And if you have the passion and the vision, you can run a career and you can be a Jewish leader.
Next person with a microphone, please. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, this is for the rabbi and also for Carolyn. I just wanted to go back to the first question that was asked. And in your discussion about normative Judaism versus aesthetic Judaism, one thing that I've personally noticed in the American Jewish community that I come from is I sometimes feel like Jewish organizations outside of the synagogue realm, like you said, they're scared of alienating people if they introduce any of that religious or normative element. And for me personally, the federation where I come from and other organizations, I think they do a really great job, but I feel like the religion is almost taken out of it. It's an expression of Jewish values, but it's not something that's inherently, I feel like, part of those organizations. And then somebody like me, I feel more inclined to go to my synagogue to get that side of things, because those other organizations just seem scared of it, or you're scared of alienating people.
Thanks.
I mean, I really believe that that's the central challenge we're going to face in this generation in the United States, is how can you cultivate a kind of normativity?
Sorry.
I knew you would disagree with me. No, I think, I'm trying to do it in education. I don't for a second pretend to have all the answers. It has to happen in philanthropy and prayer and everywhere else. We live in a society that's open, democratic, and pluralistic, where people can choose what it is they want to do. So in that vein, everyone lives an aesthetic life. Everyone does what you want to do, and if you don't like it, you opt out and do something else. So if that's the norm, how do you get from there into normative? If that's the aesthetic reality, how do you get people to opt into normativity? And normativity doesn't mean halakha or orthodoxy or something. It means something bigger than yourself, whether that's a community, an organization, a political agenda, and everyone's going to have to figure out that path from aesthetic to normative in their own organization and teach each other, I think.
Thanks. Anyone else want to respond?
I'll just be quick because it was also directed at me. I think one of the things that we see is that people are doing things for themselves. So the reason that I think Limud is successful is that the program and the design of the events are put together by people who want to see that kind of thing. And then within that, we've created communities, not because we've made that happen, it's not a top-down organization, but the people themselves, when I talk about grassroots, I truly mean that, are creating their own communities, which then probably lead more to some of the normative things that you're also talking about. So it has to come, I think, from within.
Oh, great. Microphone person? Who's got a microphone? And a question. Okay, in the meantime, until someone does get one. You all set? Okay.
My name is Edgar from São Paulo, Brazil. I have a little bit a different perspective. When you say about tomorrow, I think sometimes we miss a bit today. And there are, I think, existing young leaders. And the big challenge is how does the older generation, or let's by analogy call it the old school, interact today with the current young leaders? Because I hear a lot that we have tomorrow, we're going to have young leaders. For 10 or 15 years, I am already part of a community. And I find it hard that we still are not able to integrate and sit in the same side of the table, maybe old school and new school, to reach to an old school and new views, and I would like to ask exactly this: how can we, in fact, sit on the same table together and speak a little bit about today, so that we can reach tomorrow?
On that? Go ahead, keep trying.
Yeah.
You're really good.
Thank you.
Have you finished your question, or are you too afraid to keep continuing on with it?
So, how can we address today so that one day we can get tomorrow in an efficient way?
Thanks. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome the Karen Assad Young Leadership Kesher Mission, Julie Koshitsky Mission. Sponsored by our honorary president, Julie Koshitsky and Henry Koshitsky. Well, to give an answer to your question, Edgar, I think Karen Assad is one of the examples where these two kinds of leadership meet. The executive, which is sort of the ruling body of Karen Assad, in fact, sits together old leaders, old in terms of old in the organization and in terms of old of age, and young leaders, because we try to find a common agenda where these two kinds of leadership, of people and of agendas come together. So I think, and I'm glad that you, in fact, are participating in this conference, because you realize that this is exactly what is happening within the organization. So it's not about alienating the old, because we have a lot to learn from the old. It's about adapting the old with the new. And this is, what we try to do with Karen Assad.
I'll just add to that. I agree. I see it happening all the time. I think that a few years back there was this paradigm of the establishment and the anti-establishment, and I see every day that those two camps sort of vanishing and the idea of the melding of the two really happening. I see what we call young social entrepreneurs becoming Jewish professionals. And just to answer the question above, I wasn't quick enough on the trigger. I think that being a career professional in the Jewish world is something that is very respectable and that more people should do. And I think that there are fantastic opportunities in the Jewish world, and I hope that there'll be more of them. But I see it happening all the time. I see that people from the professional world are taking on more risky or entrepreneurial initiatives, and I think that there's a flow that's happening between what was considered more the establishment and the anti-establishment, and perhaps it's not happening quick enough, or it could be happening faster, things like that. Absolutely, but I think it's definitely happening now. And you're a great beatboxer.
Okay, next question from the audience, please. Question person with a microphone, great.
Got one here?
Just take the initiative
I
here.
think it's on.
So if you don't have a microphone, and
I'll be a bit contrarian to what Justin just said. I think there's a tremendous almost industry, which is great in terms of helping build Jewish leaders across all the different organizations, Wexner and everybody else. I think the problem that I see in the United States, at least, is that most of the major institutions are very top-heavy, and money is kind of the key to access. And that's not just federations and not just the OU or religious organizations. It's also Jewish schools, JCCs. That's kind of how you get in. That's how you get on the board. That's how you get access to make a difference. The flip side is the social entrepreneurship. So I guess I'd love to get your opinions on how we encourage the social entrepreneurship, but still open those doors. And some of it's moving people out, but also it's letting other people in, when right now that access isn't quite the way we want it to be.
I'll be glad to jump in. Look, maybe on this panel, I'm not the only. I'm definitely one of the champions of social entrepreneurship and making room for it. But let's be honest with ourselves here. At the end of the day, someone's got to pay for it all, right?
Well, no. Well, pay for what? I mean, that's the question. Is it paying for local federation work in the community? What about leadership? I think we're talking about leadership. So the question is, people who have things they want to do or contribute or ideas, how do they get that access to the institutions that are already there?
I'm just going to piggyback on that question, if that's okay. Someone has asked a question that's not often asked, I think, and if you could integrate it into your responses, that'd be super. Once you're in that world and you want to do different, or you want to do more, require leadership skills in not necessarily a Jewish context, how do you do that within the confines of a given organization? Do you need to go outside of an organization, your own organization, in order to do that? If you can tie that in, that would be great.
Can I take that first part of the question about money? In the UK, we've just done a survey to do with the role of women leaders, but it's relevant to this. And one of the recommendations is about separating, or trying to separate, the role of people that bring money to the table, who we absolutely need, and I'm incredibly grateful from a Limburg perspective for each and every one of our donors. We need that money. We need to do it to develop our leaders and to do the programs that we want to do, but that shouldn't necessarily mean that you have a place at the table in deciding the strategy and the vision for an organization. I think for me, they're two separate things. And in terms of, I've completely forgotten the second half of your question.
How do you expand your leadership skills outside of your organization?
Absolutely. So I guess one of the things within Limud is we do more and more leadership development for our volunteers, and it's interesting, some of our volunteers say it's way better than what they get in their proper jobs. And we do way more as well in terms of what we were saying before about networking. We're bringing people from across the world together to learn from each other. And then I guess it is about relying on leadership programs within the community that provide an excellent service as well.
If I can jump in. Look, one of the reasons such interesting things are happening now, including Limud, which, by the way, not only is money taken out of the equation in terms of getting involved, but even we, the educators, aren't paid. One of the reasons, just a little plug there, but as part of the success story, and one of the reasons there are such interesting things happening is because foundations are behind them. And foundations don't have to worry about where the money is coming from. And so they can open up into the leadership, into their rooms, all kinds of people who don't bring money to the table, but bring ideas and creativity. You know, it's like cramming for an exam the night before, your brain shuts down. And our federations, in some respect, feel that they're cramming every day, and they can't, it's hard for them to take a breath and think, what about if we open our doors to leaders that don't bring money around the table, which was sort of my point with the quip about the Chanel bag. Now, you know, leave it to Justin, the young one, to make the point on the panel that, of course, this affluence is needed. Of course, donors are needed. None of us are naive. But at the same time, the human resources that are being lost, the human capital and the social entrepreneurship because of this this strata is problematic. And as I said, we're seeing this tremendous birth of ideas because money is not needed to come to the table.
Thank you. Next question, please.
My name is Michael. I'm 15 years old from Israel. And I would like to know why in the boards of the Young Leaders Jewish organizations there is no any young leaders Jews. I mean, there are only older than the ages of the activities of the organization. For example, if we're talking about Taglit, why there is no any 20, 21, 18, even young men and women in the boards of the organization?
Right. So I think we talked about this. I think that in some cases, I think that in a lot of cases there are, but I just want to take advantage of the fact that you're a young guy from Israel, yes? So I just want to take advantage and maybe make a mention about that. That I think that this has been a fantastic panel, and it's been great to hear voices from literally all around the world. But there's one word that we haven't really mentioned at all, which is Israel here. Maybe not at all. I stand corrected. So the word that was mentioned few times was Israel.
The word that everyone, no one except Johanna mentioned.
Yeah. So I think that I would just be remiss if this panel, if this session ended without saying that, I mean, I think first of all that that's one thing that's missing from this panel up here. But I do think that that there are amazing things happening in Israel where traditionally I think young Israeli leaders who are striving to think about Israel more in a national context and more in the sense of bettering Israeli society are getting more and more that Israel has a central role to play in the Jewish world, and that leadership here in Israel is not just about Israel, but it's about the Jewish world. So I'm encouraged by some of the things that I'm seeing, but I think that a lot more could be done in that realm.
Thanks. Anybody else on the Israel piece from here on the panel?
I want to add something. I think, Justin, first of all, I agree with you, but, you know, the centrality of Israel, as I said before, you know, quite at length, is key to all the Jews around the world. But the problem here is that, you know, we have a title which is Jewish leadership. Israeli leadership is Jewish leadership. So, I mean, the Israelis need to realize that not only they're Israelis, but they're also Jews. So the fact that we don't have a Jewish Israeli leader here is, I think, is a mistake, because, you know, the fact that it's Jewish, it doesn't mean it cannot also be Israeli.
I'm sorry. An important addition that we all need to think about carefully, that not all Israeli leadership is Jewish leadership. There are minority communities and non-minority communities who have a lot to say about the way this country is going to be brought ahead, and that's a whole different discussion, or maybe it's not a whole different discussion, but it's something we need to think about.
That's not the title of the panel. The title of the panel is Jewish leadership, and inside Jewish leadership, you also have Israeli leadership. That's my point.
It's next year's panel. Okay. We have about 5 more minutes for questions from the audience, so please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Gary from Johannesburg. As an entrepreneur, I'm a risk taker, okay? As a lay leader, I agree, I think we have to think out the box, but how do you, as the questions for Justin, how do you, like what type of risk, can you define are you talking about moderate risk taking, aggressive risk taking? Can you give us an example? And how do you balance, because it's a double-edged sword, if the fallout is negative from the risk you're taking, it can be quite costly. So how would you answer that?
So I'll go back to, what I introduced there was, when I introduced it, I talked a little bit about something I learned from the world of finance. There's investors often have a risk portfolio, or they refer to something as a risk portfolio, which is generally not, you don't put all your eggs in your risk basket. And there definitely is the same kind of approach that's needed here. But I think more important than that is that when I'm referring to taking risk, I'm not talking about just philanthropists spending their money on risky endeavors. I'm saying that there's risk that has to be taken by all of us. I mean, us young people also have to take risks to break out of our comfort zones. Professionals in the Jewish world need to take risks on listening to people. And yeah, also philanthropists need to take some risks on young people with ideas that are cutting edge or that might take us out of our traditional boxes that we're in. So I think that there's elements of risk that we all need to bear, and depending on what positions we play in this global community, I think that's what determines how much risk we need to be ready to have an appetite for.
Can you give one example?
He's asked for an example. No risk.
Can you give an example? Just a simple example.
A simple example of risk taking?
What you're referring to, like from a community perspective.
Joanna just said it now. Consider Birthright Israel. The idea of bringing young people on a free trip to Israel. Consider this conference, for example. The idea of bringing all these people from around the world to gather. I think there's a lot of good examples.
Birthright was started by entrepreneurs, not by agency initiative.
I'm sorry, we're going to need to
come again.
We're going to need to stick with the microphone, folks. You're welcome to stand up and get in line.
Birthright was started by entrepreneurs.
That's not a microphone. Do we have time for 2 more questions? Folks have just been waiting patiently.
Okay, so very quickly, I was very interested by what Deborah said about sometimes you're in a room and anyone under the age of 40 with a pulse is just called a leader by virtue of turning up. Or I'm paraphrasing somewhat. But have we cheapened the term and the role of leadership? Are we sometimes trying too hard by kind of chasing everyone under the age of 40 and trying to put them on boards and call them leaders? I certainly know people who don't go to things because they say, they'll just try and get me to do something. Are those people the failures, or are we sometimes trying too hard?
Look, I think the only negative outcome of cheapening the word is the extent to which we might not be attracting those others that Daniel spoke of, and sort of what was behind one of the questions of this panel, which is who else is out there that's really interested and talented, but is not coming onto this enterprise. I almost did an initiative in San Diego where the granting fell through, but I was approached to do a project that would somehow look at who's in the environment in leadership and what is the process by which we get them interested enough in us that we harness their talents. So for me, it's okay that we call everyone a Jewish leader. It's very Jewish of us to call everyone a Jewish leader, but the point is, what are we losing by that? There is an idea of something having a cachet to it and putting language to something that's meaningful and authentic. So yes, I think you're correct, and I think I'm correct in making you think that you're correct. That we ought to think a little more carefully about who we call a leader and why, and it is because we're so desperate. We don't want to lose someone, and so we compliment the hell out of them so that they'll come back, instead of, as I suggested before, having the confidence that the product, which is Judaism and the enterprise of the Jewish people, is interesting enough and deep enough and complicated enough that people will come on board, even if we don't call them a leader, but engage them in the kinds of ways that Daniel was describing.
Thank you very much. We're going to need to wrap this session, unfortunately. I know there's a lot more questions. I'm going to invite first of all, extend my thanks to this amazing panel and wonderful panel.